get sick? What is it that causes a brain to stop functioning properly? Those are some of the questions that I want to answer tonight, and I've gleaned a lot of that from the scientific literature. So everything that I talk about tonight is going to be from journal articles that I've read, many of which I've talked about on my radio show. And tonight, I want to give you some ideas, some things that you can actually do, practical things that you can do to preserve the health of your brain. And there's lots of things that you're going to find out that you can do. Even you can, buddy. It's my little friend here. And so I see a lot of parallels between spinal subluxations and Alzheimer's. And as a chiropractor, I see that. And one of the parallels I see is, first of all, Alzheimer's doesn't start when you're old. You get the effects of Alzheimer's when you're old. Alzheimer's probably starts 30, sometimes even 40 years before the symptoms come on. You can have subluxations in your neck when you're young and have the symptoms when you're older. The second thing is subluxations can affect the central nervous system, just as Alzheimer's affects the central nervous system. And number three is that there's a lot of things you can do to prevent Alzheimer's and to take care of yourself. There's a lot of things you can do to fix subluxations and to keep them and to keep your spine healthy. So, without any further delay, let's get into the talk. One other thing, this is the third talk that I do on the brain. There's two others, and some of you have been to them. I do one called How to Shrink Your Brain, and that's all the literature about what causes the brain to get smaller. We're not going to talk about that tonight. We're going to talk about what causes the brain to get sick, okay? The other one is how natural health care affects brain function, and both of those, I did the Shrink Your Brain seminar. That was the first one I did this year, and the other one's going to come up later on this year. So let's get into Alzheimer's. If you look at the Canadian Journal of Psychiatry, 2013, 1 in 3 seniors in the U.S. dies with Alzheimer dementia. Alzheimer's disease is the third leading cause of death in the United States right now. I mean, let me tell you this, and probably some of you have heard me say this before, but when I was in chiropractic school back in the 70s, and we had our neurological textbook, Alzheimer's was like a little paragraph. You know, there wasn't a lot of information then, because people weren't getting Alzheimer's back then. I mean, those of you who can remember back that far, back in the 70s, you barely heard of carpal tunnel syndrome. You never heard of autism. Didn't hear of Alzheimer's very much. These are pretty current problems. Okay, now it's the third leading cause of death. Took over stroke not too long ago. The Alzheimer's disease crisis could bankrupt the United States by 2050 as the cost for caring for those with Alzheimer's disease is skyrocketing. Right now we have more than 28 million baby boomers that will have Alzheimer's disease by 2050. Now, I'm a baby boomer, and you know, I don't plan on being in this category. Okay, I'm just going to tell you that right now. And I don't want any of you in that category either. All right, so that's why you're here tonight, to learn how not to be there. They will account for nearly 25% of Medicare spending by 2040. So this one problem will eat up 25% of all Medicare by 2040. Personally, I think that's a conservative figure. I think it's going to be a lot higher than that. Now, you don't have to read this slide. This is really wordy, but it's a good slide, so I left it in there. Okay, this Murray Waldman, he studied epidemiological data, and he looked at other problems that old people get, as well as Alzheimer's, like for example, hip fractures. And you know, hip fractures generally, as the population ages, hip fractures go up with the population as they age, kind of linearly, okay, in a linear fashion. But what he finds is that with Alzheimer's, it's exponentially. I mean, it's not like this, it's going up like this, okay? In other words, far more people are getting Alzheimer's than they should, all right? And so, like for example, he says, just between 2000 and 2006, U.S. Alzheimer's deaths rose by 47%, while by comparison, deaths from heart disease, breast cancer, prostate cancer, and stroke combined decreased by 11%. This is a big deal. Now, a Canadian study shows that we may be able to test Alzheimer's with saliva, okay? And that we may be able to discriminate normal aging from cognitive impairment in Alzheimer's just using some salivary testing. The latest thing that I've read on Alzheimer's are really trying to develop a blood test that detects this early, okay? So the question is, if you get a blood test and it says you have Alzheimer's early, then what are you supposed to do? All right? Think about that. There aren't any drugs for it. There's no drugs for Alzheimer's right now. And so we're going to tell you, I'll tell you what to do. I'll tell you things you can do now that will prevent it. So what causes Alzheimer's? Well, we know that hyperglycemia, hyperinsulinemia, and insulin resistance could be risk factors for the formation of these plaques that you get in the brain. Some researchers are referring to Alzheimer's as type 3 diabetes. And you can go back that phrase came out in 2005, so it's been around for a while. Here's a really interesting study right here. This came out of the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease in 2012. High-carb diets increase your risk of dementia by a whopping 89%, whereas high-fat diets lower it by 44%. Lower it, yeah. Now I want to ask you guys a question. Anybody in here, remember, some of you aren't old enough to have been there then, but remember in the 80s and the 90s, everybody was telling us to eat low-fat diets, you know, right? Remember that? Yeah, I never bought that because I couldn't stand it. I mean, I hated it. I had to have butter and fat. I just couldn't do it, you know, but a lot of people did. Okay, so what do you think they substituted for the fat?
Vegetable oil.
What?
Vegetable oil.
Vegetable oil and
all kinds of additives that
Sugar.
were bad kind of stuff.
yeah, sugar. Sugar is what they really substituted. So we decreased fat, substituted sugar. We're told to do this. Who told us to do this? And
Pharmaceuticals.
yeah, basically our conventional healthcare system told us that we're supposed to do this. And the government was in on it too. George McGovern, I won't get into all of that. You go back to George McGovern, he was one of the people that swung it, you know, in that direction. So this was back in the 90s, so what do we have now? We have an explosion of Alzheimer's disease, right? I mean, and everybody, this is the biggest fraud, the biggest lie that's probably one of the biggest lies that's ever been perpetrated on the American public. It's this low-fat diet. And here's this article, this journal article that comes around and says you eat a high-fat diet that lowers Alzheimer's by 44%. Now, can anybody think about why that might be? Now, this is good fats, okay? This isn't...
Tell us what you mean by high fats, and what about high carb? Like if it's whole grain bread and it's brown rice and red rice, and, you know, all the whole grains.
Well, whole grain bread is part of the high carb diet.
Yeah, I know. So that's what I'm asking.
Yeah,
so all those good whole grains that are organic and all that, that's not good. And
I mean, I'm not saying you can never...
and millet and all those
well,
things.
quinoa is probably okay, but I'm not saying you can never eat that stuff, Sherry.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, it just shouldn't be the whopping big part of your diet. And so when we talk about fat, okay, I'm not talking about going to McDonald's and buying fries. Okay, so we're not talking about that kind of fat. Okay, yeah, you're upset. Okay, that's okay. You get them after
And I
me.
suppose chocolate's out too.
What?
Right? Chocolate, no chocolate.
Dark chocolate's not so bad.
Okay.
All right.
Except there's lots of sugar in it.
Well, if you get low sugar dark
Yeah.
chocolate, that's not so bad. So. Since you brought it up though, I didn't bring up the chocolate. So. Okay, so high fat diets. What would be considered like a high fat diet?
Coconut oil?
So what do you eat?
I eat a lot of butter.
Yeah.
I eat butter, cream, eggs. I eat lard.
Coconut oil.
Lots of coconut
Yeah,
oil.
okay.
I
And
eat
avocados.
Avocados, right? Good. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Avocados have a lot of fat in it. So
Olives,
What?
Olives.
Yeah. Okay. Olives, right, exactly. So natural, real food that has real fat, like salmon, pretty fatty, okay? We know what high carb diets are. We don't have to get into that. So research published in 2013 showed that sugar and other carbohydrates can disrupt your brain function even if you're not diabetic or have any signs of dementia. Okay, that's in the journal Neurology, 2013. So, so sugar's bad. It's bad news. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that I'm off sugar completely. I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to, because I'm not. But I really restrict the amount of sugar that I eat in my diet. I really restrict it.
Do you cut back on fruits then too?
No, I don't worry about fruit.
Okay.
Don't worry about it. I don't. Okay. I don't worry about fruit. But I don't eat this
Yeah.
or that. I don't eat those. Okay.
My fruity pebbles.
I don't eat any of that. So I don't eat a lot of the obvious forms of sugar. Okay. But what this is saying is that even if you don't have you're not diabetic, you don't have any forms of dementia, carbohydrates still hard on the brain. The sugar is still bad for you. Here's another thing. People who undergo surgery with general anesthesia tend to decline faster on measures of cognition and brain shrinkage. Okay, so if you can avoid going under in surgery, do it. Okay, because there is a connection between people that have anesthesia and people that get Alzheimer's, and that was at the Oregon Health and Science University in July of 2015. Here's another thing, and some of this stuff's pretty easy. In a recent study, again, this is JMA Neurology in September 2015, people with vitamin D deficiency experience cognitive declines at rates 2 to 3 times faster than those with sufficient vitamin D levels. So, lower vitamin D equals cognitive decline. So, how do we get vitamin D?
Sunshine.
Sunlight. That's the best way to get it. Okay, get out in the sun. All right. Now in the wintertime, it's okay to take a supplement. Supplement vitamin D. 2 to 5,000 units a day is fine. But vitamin D is really important, and the best way to get it is in the sun.
Is cod liver oil a good thing?
Yeah,
Fish oil?
it's good. And there's evidence that there's this connection between vitamin D and MS, and people that live in northern climates tend to get MS a lot more than people that live in sunny southern climates. Dr. Mark Hyman, author of a book called The Ultra Mind Solution, and he's pretty well-known functional medicine guy. He refers to Alzheimer's disease as a brain on fire, and he says these things. Excuse me. Oh, what I do here?
Can you go back to that quote?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get back to the talk here. Let's see. Okay.
There you go.
Okay, so he basically said all of these things can contribute to Alzheimer's, including nutrient-lowering medications and vaccines containing toxic metals, and all contribute to this brain on fire. This is a really big deal, is food intolerances and gluten intolerance. I'm not going to go into so much of this today. I do go into this on how natural health care affects brain function. I talk a lot about food and gluten intolerance. One of the things that we do know scientifically now, ironclad, that certain people, gluten intolerance will attack the central nervous system and cause central nervous system dysfunction. And we can measure that with testing that we do, and we can measure that on one of the tests I do called the Wheat-Zoomer test. Actually measures that. Now, Alzheimer's may start with chronic stress in the brain, but eventually it does turn into an autoimmune disease. And so you can actually measure brain antibodies with laboratory testing and find out, do you have antibodies to your brain? And here I have the Cyrix Labs is one lab that does it. There's another lab I just started using that I really like called Vibrant Health Labs. And they have actually, I think, a little better test than Cyrix for brain autoantibodies. And autoantibodies in the brain can be treated with very specific nutritional formulas. And the standard process neurotrophin PMG treats brain autoantibodies, okay? It's a specific product for brain autoimmune function. So that's something that can be measured and can be treated nutritionally. Now, here's an article in Medical Hypothesis in April 2016. It's one of my favorite medical journals. This article made a very good argument for several nutritional strategies for Alzheimer's. They said that basically, the brain is very vitamin B deficient, especially B6, B12, and folic acid. So if you can get those measured, and if you're low in those, that's a really good thing to supplement with those particular nutrients. Now, there's a test that I have called the micronutrient test, which actually tests these, and it tests them in forms that shows how the body's metabolizing them rather than just how much you have, which is a lot more important way to test them. So there are ways to test for that and find out where your status is. Many Alzheimer's patients are low in magnesium, so magnesium supplement has been shown to be helpful. And silicic acid-rich mineral water lowers the aluminum levels, which leads to improvement in cognitive performance. So how do we know if we have aluminum? How do we know if we're carrying aluminum? Because we know there's a connection between aluminum and Alzheimer's. How do we know if we have?
For sure, that's a fact.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's not the only thing that is out there, but it is. There is a connection there. Yes, it is. How do we know if we've got aluminum?
Hair analysis.
Hair analysis, yeah. That's one of the best ways is you do a hair analysis. You can do a blood metal screen, tell you if you're carrying aluminum. But hair analysis shows long-term how you're doing with long-term heavy metals or toxic metals. A very recent study regarding cognitive decline in Alzheimer's in mice bred for rapid aging revealed the following. Now, this was in mice. They found a combination of these things, vitamins and minerals, beta-carotene, bioflavonoids, cod liver oil, flaxseed, garlic, and green tea, maintain brain cell numbers and mass in these mice. Now, where do you get beta-carotene?
Carrots?
Carrots, right. Where's another source of beta-carotene? Anybody here like sweet potato? Yeah, squash is good. That's
Yellow
good.
Squash, the orange squash.
Yeah, orange, yellow squash.
The orange colored things.
Yeah, sweet potatoes, yams, things like that. Yeah. And so they found that the mice, when they gave these things to mice, that they maintained the cellular mass in their brain, they maintained cognitive function, and it prevented deterioration of sight and smell. But what happens when we get older? What do we lose? Sight and smell and hearing and other things too that we don't want to lose. Okay, so here are things that, now they did this in mice. You can't really do this in human beings because it's a little harder to study brain cell numbers and brain mass. You can do it with some of the imaging they do now, but they found it worked pretty well in mice. So that's not a bad idea to use some of this for us, okay? And a lot of the supplements I have contain these products. Now here's an interesting study in the journal Alzheimer's and Dementia in 2014. It showed that regular use of fish oil supplements slowed or stopped cognitive decline in Alzheimer's. Starting fish oil supplements in middle age was the most effective. I mean, how simple is this? Okay? I mean, you're not taking an expensive drug. You just get a good fish oil supplement and start taking it, and that may be the thing that prevents it for you. It is a thing. Now, if you never exercise, then you've got some other issues we're going to talk about here in a minute. But intakes of fatty fish like salmon have been consistently associated with the slowing of cognitive decline and decreased risk of Alzheimer's disease and dementia. Okay, this is in JAMA just 2 years ago. The study also emphasized that diet, regular physical exercise, maintaining normal blood pressure, and cognitive stimulation were other factors that were effective to prevent Alzheimer's. Now, this is a journal of the American Medical Association, and this is a journal that I access regularly. Now, I don't read every article in it because there's a lot of articles that are just very esoteric science that doesn't apply to me or hardly anybody else, but there are some really good articles in there sometimes. And so I find it interesting that JAMA is talking about diet and exercise and things like that, where I guarantee you back in the early 90s, I was reading a medical journal called Postgraduate Medicine, and they weren't talking about that stuff back then. But they are now because that's where research is going. Now here's something else. There's some studies that are starting to confirm that artificial sweeteners may play a role in the development of Alzheimer's. And that's because your body turns some of these artificial sweeteners into methanol, which is very toxic to the brain. So I try and avoid things like Equal, Splenda, NutraSweet. I avoid those. I don't use those. They're the only sweetener that we use at home. We use a little bit of honey and stevia, and that's about it. Okay, we occasionally, my wife uses a little brown sugar for some things, but not very often. But we don't use any of this, and that's the reason why. It affects the central nervous system. Here's another interesting study in Journal of Alzheimer's Disease. January of 2014 stated that coconut oil has a positive survival effect on neurons affected by amyloid beta plaques. So one of the things that we use a lot in our house, and I know some of you do too, is coconut oil. We go through coconut oil like crazy at our house. We put it in everything, and for this reason. Now, why do you think fats are so important in the diet? Okay, they are a source of energy. That's true.
Because they carry fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K.
Okay, so you need fats to absorb those vitamins, but why else?
Brain is cholesterol.
Yeah, that's right. Your brain is 60% fat. All your cell membranes are made of fat, and cell membranes are the brain of your cells. So your whole nervous system is basically fat. It's mainly fat. So if you go on a really low-fat diet, you're going to do away with your nervous system, and I don't think anybody wants to do that. I certainly don't. So Stephanie Seneff, she's a researcher at MIT, and I really like her a lot. Whenever she, to me, she's like E.F. Hutton. Whenever I hear that she's come out with some research, I really pay attention because I really like her. She published a study linking Alzheimer's to a low-fat diet and statin drugs. And so she was studying these plaques that get in the brain. And so what she found out that her research led her to believe that these plaques are produced as a consequence of oxidative stress due to an inadequate supply of fats and cholesterol from the blood. Okay, and she said amyloid plaques are the result of the brain making its own fat and cholesterol. That's what now there's other theories on those plaques, by the way. This is one of them, okay? But think about this. Why is this disturbing?
Because doctors have told us to reduce fat and cholesterol.
Yeah. And how many people are on cholesterol-lowering drugs?
Not anymore.
Yeah, yeah. So when you think about it, we live in a crazy world, okay? If you look at the brain compromises 2% of the body's weight, uses 25% of the body's cholesterol. Cholesterol plays an important role in shaping the brain's circuitry, and Alzheimer's appears to be a consequence of the inability of neurons to function properly due to a deficiency of fats and cholesterol. Now here's another thing about how the brain works, and the reason I didn't make a slide on this was because I didn't quite know how to, I don't think I have enough information to make this make sense, but we all know that we have insulin in our bodies, and insulin brings sugar across the cell membranes, brings fat across the cell membranes. But your brain produces its own insulin, okay? And in the body, we know that chronic high insulin is really bad, okay? Chronic high insulin causes diabetes, insulin resistance, weight gain, all kinds of bad things. But in the brain, it's the exact opposite. And the insulin in the body doesn't have anything to do with the insulin in the brain. In the brain, you want high insulin. And if you have low insulin in the brain, it's bad. Okay? Now, when I was reading this article about that, they didn't quite help me to understand how that worked. But I thought it was very interesting, and I wanted to pass that on to you. That, it's a pretty major discovery in the last 10 years that the brain actually makes its own insulin. And that insulin is really important for brain function. Okay? Now, here's a surgeon, pediatric brain surgeon, Larry McCleary, wrote a book called The Brain Trust Program. And here's what he recommends for his pediatric patients: that they eat a diet high in cholesterol and animal fats, including an abundance of fish, seafood, meat, and eggs. He recommends coconuts, almonds, avocados, and cheese, all foods that contain a significant amount of fat, while encouraging the avoidance of empty carbs. Okay? Now, that's exactly the opposite of how we've been told to eat, okay, for a long time. Here's some additional recommendations for Alzheimer's. You need to avoid fructose, identify food intolerances that can cause inflammation, optimize your gut flora, consume healthy fats, reduce caloric intake, or practice intermittent fasting, improve magnesium levels, eat high folate foods like fresh vegetables, and eat real food, organic if possible. In fact, there's an article I just printed off tonight from British Medical Journal. I haven't read it yet, but it's an article that they did a study and they found out that highly processed foods are associated with increases in cancer. Now, to me, that's not a big revelation. But scientifically, they're seeing that now. So we want to eat real food, okay? Is macaroni and cheese real food? No. Okay, I know.
It's real tasty.
It's an obvious question. Some of you are thinking, why are you asking us a question? Okay, exercise regularly. This is huge. According to this journal, The Neurobiology of Disease, physical exercise enhances learning and memory. It reinstates brain function. It counteracts age and Alzheimer's associated declines. It promotes dynamic changes that facilitate brain function. It's a protective factor against cognitive impairment. And the risk of Alzheimer's disease is inversely correlated to levels of daily exercise, even with walking as little as 1 mile per day. Now, does anybody, I'm going to ask you a hard question, and if somebody can get this, I ought to give something away that's of value.
Free adjustment.
Well, yeah, I can do that. I can do that. So, what is the mechanism that exercise causes to cause the brain to work better?
Blood flow?
Okay, blood flow would be one, but that's not what I'm thinking about. Now, if you attended my class on the brain shrinkage, you probably got this, and if you remember that.
Is it reduced insulin or insulin?
No.
Is it increased oxygen?
Those are good answers, but that's not the
I'm not
answer.
giving the free adjustment.
Yeah, not yet.
And
Metabolic rate, does something to your metabolic rate?
It does. It does. I'm thinking of something that it increases. And this is, I know, this is a hard question.
Serotonin and what's the other one?
Dopamine?
dopamine and those kind of things?
It helps out with that, but that's not the answer. But that's good, Sherry. You're
Okay,
you're
I'm
thinking.
trying to win a
Increase-
free
Does it
Free
increase the good
adjustment.
cholesterol in your blood?
It's not. It does do that, but that's not the answer.
See, I think we've
The question again?
Okay, what is it about exercise that increases the volume and the increases brain function? What is it about exercise that
oxygen.
really helps?
Brain.
Oxygen is helpful, but that's not the answer to the question.
Is
Those
it-
are good answers.
Is it using your brain so you don't drop a weight on yourself?
That's not it. Okay, that's,
Doesn't
Get
it
your
cause
blood
it-
pumping?
Doesn't it cause it to grow new cells? Like it actually,
you're getting warm.
because I read a paleocardiologist and I know it's in my brain somewhere.
Okay, you're getting really warm, Amber. It's
But it
just,
does, it causes it actually builds new parts to your brain.
yeah, it's called, it increases a chemical called brain-derived neurotrophic factor.
See, that's
Oh,
why-
sure.
Yeah.
Tip of my
That's
tongue.
I knew you were gonna cover
Remember
that. But you're getting really warm there, Amber. Really, that's pretty good. Yeah, that's what happens. That's how exercise helps the brain. So here's another one, and most people don't think about this, but this is really pretty powerful. Is when you're subluxated, in the upper, especially in the upper cervical, that does affect brain function. And this is out of a journal called Neurology Research International 3 years ago. Here's what they said in this journal. Misalignments of the upper neck can obstruct blood flow to the cervical arteries and veins that can lead to chronic brain, cranial loss of blood flow, and edema. Faulty alignment in the upper neck producing loss of normal blood flow to the brain may also play a role in neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, MS, dementia, and motor neuron diseases. We're talking about chiropractic here. Okay? So when you've got a subluxation in the upper part of your neck, that we know that affects brain function. Now, in my talk on how to shrink your brain and on how natural health care affects brain function, I talk a lot more about this. I talk about some more studies that show that. Age-associated memory impairment. This is a new term coined by medical science to describe gradual memory loss. Now, in 2010, a study published in Journal of Clinical Biochemistry and Nutrition showed that the nutritional supplement phosphatidylserine had a profound effect on reversing memory loss. And we carry that here. It's called Isophos. Phosphatidylserine is also in another supplement I have called soybean lecithin. Has a lot of phosphatidylserine in it. So this is a study that showed that this one product really can help with memory loss and brain function. So
That actually reverses?
yeah,
Really?
actually reverses it. It says, reversing memory loss.
What is that? What is phosphatidylserine? What is that?
It's a product that it's part of lecithin, and along with phosphatidylcholine, and it's really helpful for it's just a chemical. It really helps with brain function.
A natural occurring?
Yeah, natural occurring,
Where
right?
does it come from?
Lecithin
Oh, all lecithin.
Yeah.
So your soybean lecithin,
has it in it.
that's the same thing?
Yeah,
It works just the same?
it has it in it. This is probably has a little bit more in it, but the soybean lecithin has a lot of phosphatidylserine in it.
You offer a supplement, the soybean lecithin. Is it the non-GMO organic?
Okay, there's no soy in it.
Oh, that's what you.
There's no soy in it.
But, so explain the difference between no soy and it's called soy lecithin.
Okay, because soybeans are very high in lecithin.
Okay.
So the lecithin is extracted,
Pure.
but there's no soy. Okay, and they don't use GMO soy, by the way. Yeah, Standard Process does not use GMO products for anything. But it's soybean lecithin. It's lecithin that's extracted from soy, but there's no soy in it. Oh, soybean lecithin does a lot of other nice things to your body too. So challenge your mind daily, learn to play an instrument, learn a new language, solve puzzles, read, okay? And that also helps a lot with brain function. So, great. Well, I went 4 minutes over tonight, so
Because we couldn't get that hard question.
yeah, I know. If somebody would have gotten that, we would have been on time, right? Okay. So I'll just take a few questions, then I gotta go.
This may be for another night, but how does this work with ketosis and keto diets that are very
The ketogenic diet.
mm-hmm.
Okay.
Really popular.
That's in my cancer talk. I go
Okay.
into things like that.
Okay.
Yeah. But the ketogenic diet is absolutely no sugar, no grain, no refined carbs in the diet at all.
And a
period.
high fat. if
High
you're
fat,
not
moderate
ketosis.
protein, right? And I talk more about that in my cancer talk, which is coming up sometime. It's coming up.
It's on the board. It's on the
Oh.
20th.
Okay. Yeah, March 27th. Okay.
Okay.
Sure.
So why, I know you do a Daniel diet once in a while, the Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego Daniel, where they do the grains, the veggies, the seeds, nuts, or anyway, and so it doesn't include animal products. So why is that a good thing to do? Why did Daniel and they have better brain than all the rest of the kingdom? And they didn't eat meat.
I got a thought. I've heard that animal foods are building nutrients and vegetables are cleansing. And if you eat just vegetables and that kind of, no animal products, and go on that, just vegetables, then it would be a cleansing thing. It would clear a lot of junk out.
Well, that was
Is
their
that-
diet though. That was
Was
their
all the
diet.
time, okay.
All the time. Yeah.
So when I do that diet, I don't eat grain and I don't eat meat, just basically fruits and vegetables and nuts when I do that diet. That's what I eat.
But
I don't eat
I
grain.
think that doesn't pulse mean grains and seeds and nuts?
Well,
or what is that?
I always thought it meant like vegetables and nuts and seeds. I don't know for sure though,
Okay,
Sherry.
Yeah, I guess I thought it meant brains.
But when I do the diet, I don't
We
eat
gotta
grain.
find out what it was, because
Yeah.
they had better brain capacity than everybody else in the kingdom.
They did.
If you're a scholar of the Bible.
Yeah, they had good brains. That's true. Yeah. So
But they weren't eating meat though, that was the thing.
they weren't eating the king's delicacies.
Which would be probably as refined carbs as they could get.
Yeah, and real probably real rich type foods that were high in sugar, high in whatever they had at the time. And it included alcohol. They weren't doing alcohol, which was part of that. So I think they were eating just a very basic vegetarian, very basic
So
diet,
they didn't
paleo
fare on the
diet.
king's meat.
Yeah. And I don't know what that was at the time.
Can you tell, what's the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia? Because it's sometimes used in the same phrase, like Alzheimer's/dementia, or like it's the same thing, but they're different. I mean, can you?
I think dementia is where, you're starting to lose it a little bit. You're starting to lose your cognitive ability. You're starting not to be able to process things. Alzheimer's is where your whole brain has gotten sick and you're just not there anymore. You're just not functioning. You can't remember who's who and it's a much farther down the path than dementia. And I think from a scientific standpoint and from an imaging standpoint is that those plaques in your brain are way worse when you've got Alzheimer's as opposed to dementia.
It's basically the same thing, just a degree.
Yeah, it's down farther down the road. Yeah. Good. Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And if any of you would like to get checked for subluxations tonight or at some point, I'd be happy to do that. We do that at we do that at our expense, and we can tell you if that's an issue for you or not. And Hannah will sign you up for that. So.
Is the hair analysis about the best test that you give for Alzheimer's? I've been to this talk before, and I thought there was a test that actually showed the insulin in your brain. Is that the hair analysis?
Okay, there's no test that I know that shows brain insulin.
Oh, okay.
There's a test that shows body insulin, and it's fasting insulin. Yeah, that's a really good test, because that can show how your body's responding to sugar. Okay, and we do that as part of the comprehensive blood panel, the fasting insulin test. There's no test that I know of that shows brain insulin. That would be a real interesting test if we could offer that. Now, the hair analysis does not show Alzheimer's. Okay, the hair analysis shows tissue mineral levels. It shows tissue function as far as adrenals, thyroid, and carbohydrate, your body's ability to handle carbohydrates, and it shows toxic metals. So it shows 5 toxic metals and how much you're storing them. That's what the hair mineral analysis showed. It's a good test, very valuable test.
How often should you have that done? I've had it done once, several years ago.
Well, we'd probably be starting over if we did it. It's been several years. Yeah. I mean, it's any testing like that, it's really good to follow up, like in 3 or 4 months. And as long as you're on the program, if you're completely off the wagon, then what's the point?
Exactly.
But as long as you're on the program, it's good to follow up and find out what's changed. Are your metals declining? Are things getting better?
What's the exact definition for subluxation?
Subluxation, misalignment of a vertebra, putting pressure on a nerve, causing dysfunction in the body.
So when the vertebra is off and it's putting pressure on nerves, that's
right, and causing dysfunction, dis-ease in the body. Yeah.
So can it be a bulging disc? Would be the
Oh, sure, yeah. Bulging disc would be a subluxation. Absolutely. Yeah.
Anytime if your vertebrae aren't lined up just right, that's what it is.
And there's nerve interference, and they're not moving properly. That's a subluxation. Yeah. Good. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.